By the early 1980s, the Soviet Navy had a form for almost everything. If a sonar operator heard a sound he couldn't place, there was a procedure for it. If an object dropped out of the sky and entered the water, there was a category, a box to check, a channel to send it up the chain. The fleet had spent years building a system precise enough to file the unexplained. In May of 1982, the captain, second rank, tried to use that system. He had just watched something rise out of the Pacific, and when he sat down to report it, he found there was no category for what he had seen. The system knew how to record an object going into the water. It had nothing for one coming out. That single gap is why I keep returning to this case. If you're the kind of person who would rather sit with a real account than be handed a tidy conclusion, stay with me, because the missing category turns out to be the least strange part of this. The location was the waters of the Kamchatka Peninsula, the far eastern edge of the Soviet Union. The vessel carried the designation SKR-3, a small anti-submarine frigate, roughly 82 meters long. Fast, heavily armed for its size, fitted with the radar and sensors, built to hunt submarines. Not a giant warship, the kind of ship whose entire purpose is to notice things in the water before they notice you. 3 men saw it: the commanding officer, the officer of the watch, and a signalman. 3 sets of trained eyes on duty in one of the most heavily militarized stretches of ocean on the planet. What they described was a cigar-shaped object breaking the surface of the Pacific and beginning to climb. The officer put its length at somewhere between 150 and 200 meters. Hold that number for a second. His own warship was 82 meters. The thing coming out of the water was more than twice the length of the deck he was standing on, over 600 feet of it. It rose slowly. He reported no sound at all. No engine, no roar of displaced water, nothing you would expect from an object that size shedding the ocean off its hull. It climbed to roughly 250 to 300 meters and held there. Then 4 lights appeared at the rear. Seconds later, it accelerated and was gone. There are no photographs, no radar tape ever surfaced. No Soviet investigation file has been released. What survives is a brief account from 3 witnesses, and that, on its own, would make this just one more story a sailor tells at the end of a long deployment, except for what the Navy around those 3 men had already been doing. By 1982, the Soviet Navy was not casually trading ghost stories. Years earlier, the fleet had grown concerned enough about unusual observations in the air and under the water that it put guidance in writing. A set of methodological instructions circulated in the late 1970s told officers how to document anomalous objects, unusual maneuverability, changes of shape, strange luminous effects, possible electromagnetic interference. This is a military organization, an institution built to identify threats, track them, and respond to them. And one line in that guidance stops me every time. Personnel were told not to provoke these objects. Keep your distance. Observe. Do not engage. Sit with what that means coming from a Navy. The default posture of a warship toward an unidentified contact is not caution, it is escalation. Somewhere in that chain, someone had looked at enough of these encounters to decide that the wiser move was to leave them alone. And here is the part I'll admit I find almost funny, in a bleak sort of way. When the officer finally filed his report and returned to base, his colleagues made fun of him. A captain second rank in one of the Soviet Union's most sensitive military regions, telling his peers exactly what he saw and getting laughed at for it. That detail rings true to me, precisely because it is so ordinary. It is the same reaction witnesses describe in every country, in every decade. But look at what the ridicule sits beside. The same Navy that had no box on its form for an object leaving the water had already, somewhere, written instructions for how to behave around objects like it. The institution was ahead of its own paperwork. It had absorbed the pattern before it built the forms to record it. If accounts that respect your judgment instead of insulting it are what you came here for, subscribing keeps them arriving. This is the kind of record that rarely makes it into the documentaries. One of the people who spent a career collecting these Soviet cases was Vladimir Azhaja, a naval officer and submarine veteran. Before he became the most prominent researcher of this subject in the country, he made an observation I haven't been able to set down. The Soviet state, he pointed out, controlled the newspapers. It controlled television. It controlled which questions scientists were permitted to ask and which the public was permitted to discuss. What it could not control, he said, were the objects themselves. That is the larger shape behind one sighting of Kamchatka. Through the entire Cold War, the Americans watched the Soviets, and the Soviets watched the Americans. And every so often, both sides logged an encounter with something that belonged to neither of them. Objects that crossed sealed borders, entered restricted zones, and left when they chose, recognizing none of the lines the two superpowers had drawn across the world. There is a second thread the same Navy carried through those years, and it ran beneath the ships rather than above them. Beginning in the late 1960s, Soviet submarine crews, experienced men and not nervous recruits, started reporting strange acoustic contacts they could not identify. The sounds were odd enough to earn a nickname: the Quakers, because what the crews heard resembled the croaking of a frog. The contacts moved. They seemed to respond, and they appeared often enough to enter official Navy discussion and study. No one ever produced the source of the sound. Now picture the actual moment off Kamchatka. May 1982, the North Pacific, a Soviet anti-submarine frigate the length of a city block, bristling with the sensors designed to find anything hiding under the surface. On its deck, 3 men. In front of them, a silent shape, twice the length of their ship, rising out of the sea, water pouring off a hull no shipyard on Earth had laid down. It hangs at 1,000 feet. 4 lights at the back, they're nothing but open sky. No camera caught it. No radar operator left a trace anyone has found. The men went below and were laughed at, and the ocean closed back over whatever it was that had been down there long enough to come up. What remains is a single unanswered question, and it is the one the officer himself walked into at the filing desk. The Soviet Navy had a category for objects that go into the water. It needed one for objects that come out, and as far as any released record shows, that category was never written. The thing that called for it is still down there, or somewhere. Undocumented. So which is it? Did the Soviet Navy simply never get around to one more piece of paperwork, or did it understand exactly what it was dealing with and decide that some things are safer left without a name? Tell me where you land in the comments, because reasonable people split hard on this one. If you want the cases that get buried instead of explained, the ones the official record steps around, come with me. There are far more of them than anyone ever filed.